It just ate. I don't really know what else to say. This is the year of Abby Jimenez for me. This is her year. I don't know if I'll ever recover, genuinely. Also kind of went on a Catherine Center binge. I remember I finished this and I knew it was my number one. This one was a roller coaster. You just see those books and you're like, I know I'm gonna love this, but like, am I ready yet? I'm so glad I was ready. This was the first Abby Jimenez book I've read, and it clearly hasn't been my last because there's 3 or 4 more on this list. I am too excited for this. Hello besties and welcome back. This is such an exciting video because we are going to be doing my 24 favorite books that I read in 2024. I did honestly though have kind of difficulty. It was a little difficult for me to pick these all because I feel like honestly this year was not my best reading year wise. Like I have my number one, but I'm still even a little like hesitant that it's number one, you know, whereas like last year I was like Kingdom of Ash, no questions. This isn't like super set in stone, especially like numbers 5 to 24 basically. It's not perfect and it changes every day because honestly I just feel like this year I didn't read a ton of like 5-6 star books or just ones that stuck with me, and also for most of the year I wasn't really in my like fantasy era, and I feel like when I read a good fantasy book those are often what I rate like really high. So those are some disclaimers, but let's just hop right in. Number 24 we have The Fake Out by Stephanie Archer. I read this, actually I'll look because I have no clue. I read this in February, but it says I started it December but I finished it in February, so I think I like read like a chapter and then just like wasn't in the mood for it or whatever. Okay, so this is a hockey romance. It is the sequel to Behind the Net, which was that hockey as well? Anyways, I don't know, but this one I freaking loved. So the main girl, I get this confused with like some other hockey series, but I think she's like the trainer or like something like that with the team, and so her ex joins the hockey team. He's just not like a good person, so she fake dates. His name is Rory. They fake date because he's also on the team, and he's just like golden retriever, acts of service, king. Goodreads thing says he's obsessed with forced proximity, and he's just like such the perfect book boyfriend. Like he did everything right, I feel, and he just had such good love languages. I love a sports romance because I just love the team aspect. Like it's just so fun seeing other players like egg each other on and stuff like that, so I really loved that. The romance was so cute, and I just can't say enough good things about the guy in this book. Like it was so good. I definitely think it deserves to be on this list. Again, I'm not too sure about like the spots, but this isn't one I think about too often, but when I do think about sports romances, or I went to my first hockey game the other day, I was thinking about this book hardcore. Did the third one come out in this series? I think it actually might have, so I definitely need to pick that up because I liked Behind the Net too. Really, I like any sports romance. Doesn't matter the sport. And then 23rd, I said No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is one of the only thrillers I read this year. I almost said month. I read a couple Freida McFadden ones, which those are just always a fast-paced fun time, especially the audiobooks, but this is one that has stuck with me. Every time I drive past a rest stop, no, I refuse. Like I will not be stopping at one unless it's an absolute emergency. And I did really enjoy the twist in this book. It really caught me off guard. It was at some points kind of like far-fetched and just like unrealistic, but I still had such a fun time reading it, and it definitely kept me up. Like I could not put it down. I liked how it ended. Actually no, I didn't. The ending was just crazy, and this is definitely a thriller that's like stuck with me, and it did its job. It scared me, which normally I don't chase that feeling, but this one did a good job. And then we have Same Time Next Summer by Annabelle Monaghan. This is the first year I've read one of her books, so this was super fun. I read this one first, and then I read Summer Romance later in the summer. I didn't really love Summer Romance as much as Same Time Next Summer, which I feel like is kind of an unpopular opinion. I feel like with Summer Romance, I just couldn't really connect with the characters as much as Same Time Next Summer, so that's why I liked it so much. So the premise of this one I loved because so it's kind of childhood friends to lovers. So they have this like lake beach house that they go to in the summer, and this year she's coming back to it, and she has a husband and a job. Maybe it's just a fiance actually. And so when she gets there, her childhood friend slash lover is in the house next door, which she does not expect him to be there. And I really liked this one because I really enjoyed the setting of it, and our main girl was really into like swimming swimming in the water and doing stuff like that. So I loved reading about her swimming, the things they used to do in the lake as kids. Like, it was just so entertaining how we got that aspect, and I love the setting. I did love the romance too, and I just feel like her books just have so much character development and growth. Like, it was crazy seeing how the main girl changed throughout the story and just embraced, I guess, like certain aspects about herself that she hasn't in a while. So I loved it so much because of that, and it was just such a fun time. Annabelle Monaghan really reminds me of Abby Jimenez especially, but also Emily Henry. Like, her romances are just so much more wholesome and like deep, and the characters always have something deeper going on, which that is what I love in a romance book. You will see that throughout this wrap up, my taste in romance books. So that was number 22. Okay, now this one, it's kind of questionable again, the spot it's in, but like I think it kind of deserves to be on this list just because I had a blast listening to this book, The Siren by Kiera Cass. So random, and I feel like her books have been kind of hit or miss for me. Like, the Selection series, actually, like, I love it, but then I read the Betrothed. Dude, I can't say that. I cannot say it. And I didn't really love that one, but this one was just such a fun time. It follows these 3 girls, and they are sirens, so the ocean kind of is like their boss, or kind of like a mother figure. Is that the right, a mother figure? I don't know. You know what I'm saying, maybe. But so she basically tells them when they have to go out and do siren things, you know, like lure people in and kill them. But when she doesn't do that, then they are kind of just free to live their lives. They just live in a house in a normal town. They sneak onto the campus and pretend to be students, and they just go different places, see different things like that. So I really enjoyed this because it's kind of unlike any other siren book I've read, and it was so interesting to me, and it just felt, I guess, really detailed about how the sirens were developed and all of that. And I loved learning about each one's backstory and their lives prior to being a siren, and kind of just like their thoughts on it. So it's really interesting to me, and there is romance in this book, and I honestly loved the romance so much. Like, it was so unexpected. Like, I didn't even really know there was this much romance in this book, but I loved it so much. It was just so sweet and wholesome, and you could just tell these characters were meant to be together. I listened to the audiobook and it was a great time. I loved it. And then the first physical book I read, we have Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. This is about Ophelia, and she has a sister, and her sister kind of goes missing into this game of Phantasma, and during this time their mother has recently passed away, so they're dealing with that. As I mentioned, her sister goes missing into the game of Phantasma, which is kind of like this like pop-up Caraval type thing. Like, you're in this manor and you can't leave until the game's over, and there's different like trials that you have to beat, and you just fight to be the winner. So Ophelia enters that, and I really liked the competition aspect, and just the vibe of this manor was kind of like eerie, and you're like unsure what's real. So I really liked that. I also loved the romance in this book. It was so good to me. It just ate. I don't really know what else to say. This was just such a good fantasy book, and for me, since as I mentioned before, I just haven't been like really in the fantasy mood lately, so to pick this up, I feel like it kind of, because I read this in October, I think, it kind of just sent me down a rabbit hole of reading more and more fantasy again, which I am so grateful for because it's probably my favorite genre, and I just haven't been in the mood for it lately, so I'm so glad I'm finally back. I am back. I liked the game, and I feel like the trials were really well developed. They were very unique and just well done. I really enjoyed this book. It definitely deserves to be on this list, I feel. And then the 4th Finlay Donovan book. Normally on the rest of this list, if I've read a whole series this year, it's in one spot, but this one I just read the 4th one this year because I read the first 3 last year, and then the 4th one came out this year. I loved it. This series is so good, you guys. It is just so entertaining and fast-paced. Like, when I read a Finlay Donovan book, all 4 of them I've read in 1 or 2 days because they are just that good where you cannot put them down. They are definitely very like outlandish, and like it's not really gonna happen in real life ever, but they are so entertaining, and they're just hilarious too, and I love all the characters. Like, I just feel so connected to them after being on the 4th book, and I just want the best for them. So I love this one. I'm not gonna go into like what this one's about, but I really enjoyed the setting of it. It's different from the other 3 books, so I definitely loved that because it was just fun seeing the characters in a new setting, and like where they were at just made this story so much better, I feel. And then this year I also kind of went on a Catherine Center binge, mostly her old books, like with covers like this, like not the ones with the people on them. And I loved them so much. They've been available on Libby, so I've just been seeing that and clicking borrow, and then I've been listening and loving it. So this one follows our main couple, and they are in a plane crash. So the guy is actually the pilot, like he's the one flying the plane. And so the plane crashes. It is not good. Like the main girl is in critical condition. I think it was that she may not walk again. And so you're following her journey, kind of just dealing with the plane crash mentally, and of course physically. And there's just so many challenges that she has to overcome. And then on top of that, the relationships that are changing as she's been in critical condition, like work, friends, family, all of that. And especially her fiance who crashed the plane. There was a lot of characters in this book that I felt like weren't handling her situation good at all, and I did not like them. But Katherine Center just did a great job portraying that and like making you feel, I guess, just the emotions of different family dynamics. There is romance in here, and the romance was definitely crumbs, but it was so good, and it was just so wholesome and like acts of service-y, you know? So yeah, I love this. This book was very, very emotional and kind of hard to read at points because obviously she went through something traumatic and is recovering from it, and it's just hard to read about sometimes, like the scenes where people aren't taking it the way they should be and, you know, should be acting differently. But yeah, I love this one so much. And Katherine Center's books, again, like I said before, they're just more emotional and deep romance books where the characters are going through a lot. Speaking of that same exact vibe, Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is the year of Abby Jimenez for me. This is her year. If you guys watched my Minnesota vlog, I went to her bakery. So that was so cool because I did get a signed copy of Life's Too Short, and I'm trying to pace myself with her books. I love them so much. I could read them back to back, but like I need to space it out for like when I'm really needing a pick me up or something. So as you can tell from the cover, she is more like a city girl and he lives in a small town. Like he literally has a goat and other animals, which are hilarious because Abby Jimenez is the queen of just adding like silly elements while still having this like gut-wrenching story. So Alexis works as an ER doctor in the hospital in the city, and Daniel is a carpenter in this small town. So I really enjoyed the aspect of one of them has to change their whole lifestyle in order for the romance to work and them to be together. So I loved that because it's just like such a deep connection when one of them is willing to literally give up their whole life for the other person. I loved reading about the small town, and I also loved reading about her as an ER doctor in the city because they're just two completely different dynamics, and I loved how she made them mesh together and become a couple. There was so many funny moments in this, and both of the characters are incredible. I just loved it so much, and I always love a small town setting because there's always just so many good side characters in it, and that was the same with this book. I loved it so much. It was so sweet. I could go on, but her writing is just incredible, and you'll see more of her books in this list, so I won't gap too long. And then the next book we have is Under the Surface. If you guys have been following along, this book is very special to me because it was my first ever ARC, and I did also go to Paris this year, so it's just special all around to me. And it's also special because I really enjoyed this book. It is a thriller set in Paris, obviously, more specifically the catacombs under Paris. So basically our main girl is on like a school trip to Paris. Kind of like her main thing she wants to see there or do is visit the catacombs. And so one night her and her friends kind of get invited by this local guy to see them at this super exclusive party that's like going on in the catacombs. They leave the group and go, which would I have done that on my trip? Absolutely not, but they decided to. But she is kind of like a travel influencer. Like she loves catching thrills and creating unique content, so of course they do that. And long story short, they get trapped in the catacombs, so classmates are just trying to get them out. And this was so entertaining because it really wasn't what I expected. It was a lot more kind of dark and just fast-paced. It was not anything I expected at all. Like I was just expecting like a fun like little mystery, but this was kind of thrilling, I'd say. A lot goes down in this book and it's definitely crazy. There is a little romance in this. The crumbs ate, and yeah, I think this definitely deserves to be here. It is definitely very sentimental to me, but I still really enjoyed it, so well deserved. See, this is one that like it could be higher up, but like I have no clue. My brain is just not capable of deciding that right now. This is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This was the first Abby Jimenez book I've read, and I love loved it, and it clearly hasn't been my last because there's 3 or 4 more on this list. So this follows Bree, whatever, and Jacob, and so they both work at the same hospital, and Bree has been there for a while, and Jacob kind of comes in and they get off on the wrong foot. Like, they just clash at first. They don't like each other, and then their romance is just so sweet because they just understand each other so well. So Jacob, he does deal with social anxiety, so that's kind of why they got off on the wrong foot, and I really loved the representation in this book of that, and just how Bree was able to be there for him with it and support him. So I really liked that, and their romance, again, it's just so sweet and wholesome. They both just have so much going on, and they're able to work through it together. There's one kind of plot point in this book that just like actually is the sweetest thing ever, and I love it so much. And the thing with Abby Jimenez's books is they are kind of interconnected, so like you see these characters in other books and vice versa. So I loved that. I love these characters. I love all her characters in all her books. And then we read but you guys also saw me read this, I think. So Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was her new release this year, and it did not disappoint. Most of her books haven't disappointed for me. I've kind of seen both sides, like people love it or hate it, but I loved it. This book wasn't really a funny story. It was very emotional, and there was a lot going on and a lot the characters had to go through, but I loved them so much. Their relationship was really good, and this book had incredible side characters. Like, I loved our characters' relationships within each other and also their friends and family. This book was just so entertaining to me. I could not put it down. I think I literally binged it maybe in a day or two. I love this setting. It says Waning Bay, Michigan, and again, within all of Emily Henry's books, there is just a ton of character development and growth, and I loved seeing that because these characters just feel so real, like all of her characters do, and you just feel so connected to them at the end of the book. All right, and then we have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This book has been on my shelf for actually ever, but I finally read it because the show was coming out, and I loved it. Like, I knew I would. I don't know why it took me so long. I loved this so much, and then I watched the show. I loved the show too. So this follows Pip, and she is a high school senior, and basically in her smaller town, there's this big murder that happened. It's technically solved, but she decides to re-examine it for her final class project and kind of just dissect what happened, see if she can pick up on anything that they didn't. And that was so interesting to me because I love this book, how it wasn't like super scary or thrilling. It was more mystery-y, and that's what I love in thriller mystery books. I'm not like a scary movie person. I never have been. So this just like hit for me because it kept me on my toes so much, but it wasn't like scary. And I loved uncovering things with Pip, our main character, and she just caught me off guard so many times. Like, I'm like, how would you even figure that out? Like, I'm lost. I love this. I can't wait to continue the series. The show is also incredible, and I just love a YA mystery book. They are some of my favorites. And then I read the Lunar Chronicles this year. This is actually what I started my year with. I read the first 2, and then just last week I finished the 3rd one. I loved this series so much. Our first book is Cinder, and it follows our main girl, Cinder, and she is a cyborg, and she's also a mechanic, so she is really good at fixing stuff. And it is like a loose Cinderella retelling, so she's kind of like the outcast of her family. Like, her mom and stepsister really don't like her basically, and they actually pissed me off so much because I was just like, you guys are being so mean to her. There is the Cinderella aspect to the ball. I think instead of losing a shoe, she loses a foot because she's a cyborg. So yeah, I just love this one so much. This is like a fantasy dystopian, and the first book I feel like sets up for the series so well. Like, after finishing the 3rd book, it's just crazy though where we're at now versus where we started at the first book. Like, I feel like this is really a series that just gets better and better, and even the first book was still incredible. So for it to get this much better, it's like insane. The writing's so good. It's so fast paced. There is subplots of romance, and there is kind of where I'm at now in the 3rd book, found family, and there's just so many more characters that get added on that you begin to love and all of that. Okay, next up we have the Windy City series, which this is by Liz Tomford. I read these all this year except for the first one. I have not read the first one yet. I don't know if I plan to. I've just heard not the best things about it, and with me loving all of the other books in the series, I don't want to tarnish my views of the series reading this one, so I might skip it. I do have a hold for it on Libby though for the audiobook because I might try it that way. We'll see. But yeah, I read all of the other ones this year and I loved them all so much. Every single one of these is like a 4.5 to me, or a 5. Like, they are all so good. The romances in them are all incredible. They're all sports romances, and most of them follow different sports. The last 2 are baseball though, which I loved. I don't know anything about any of these sports, but they still all 8. All of the characters in these books are just the sweetest people ever. Like, I love them so much. Like, they just feel like my besties, and the found family in this series is so good. I just need to join the friend group. Like, here's my formal audition. There's different tropes in each of the books. They're just all different in their own ways. I don't want to say too much because, you know, it is a series and I didn't read the first one. So, but yeah, definitely deserves to be on this list, this entire series. And then Lovely War by Julie Berry. I read this somewhat recently. So this is set during World War II times, and it's told from Aphrodite and the other gods and goddesses' perspectives. So they are kind of narrating the story of this couple, James and Hazel, and they just have the sweetest, most wholesome romance ever. Like, it kind of reminded me of Divine Rivals a bit, which I've chased that feeling since I read that book last year. Like, it was so good. Or maybe the year before, I don't remember. But so they kind of meet one day. I can't really remember where it was at, but I want to say like a ball, but I don't know if that's right. It's kind of like love at first sight, but James is going off to war, so you're following them as they navigate how they can still try and be together while James is away. Obviously, it is kind of thicker, but to me it flew by. Like, I wasn't bored at all the entire time, and I loved it. I really enjoyed how Aphrodite was telling the story, because I feel like it just added a lot in the sense that, like, because you got kind of two stories then, really, with the god's perspective and then Hazel and James's, obviously, but it wasn't like told in like a, you were in their perspective, you weren't in like Aphrodite's, really. Well, you were, but like, you know what I mean. When she was telling it, you were like in their perspective. And then The Love of My Afterlife by Chrissy Greenwood. I feel like this book blew up for a while. It got so much hype, and it's so deserved. This book was so good. So it follows our main girl, Delphi, and she dies. And it's kind of like an accident death. Like, she chokes on a burger, a microwave burger at that. And so she basically gets in this waiting room for the afterlife. And when she's there, this guy pops in, and they kind of click. They have a moment, and she's like, bro, why didn't I meet this guy when I was alive? The like person who like works the afterlife waiting room is like, okay, I'll give you 10 days to find him, and if you do, you can stay alive. So obviously she takes that deal and goes on the mission to try and find that guy who she thinks is like her soulmate, whatever, because they had like a moment that gave that vibe. So I really enjoyed watching her kind of go on that journey and, you know, fight to stay alive, basically. I just loved it because the stakes were so high, and I loved watching her grow and learn so much as she was, you know, like, I have 10 days or I'm gonna die, like, if I fail. So it was just so good in that sense. There's so many good side characters in her life, and I loved them, and I loved the ending, how it wrapped up with the other characters and everything. Like, it was just so wholesome, and it's like such a short book. For it to be this like deep and detailed in this short a time was crazy. I loved it. And then this is kind of like the series. I read most of these this year, so maybe the first two last year, I don't remember for sure, but the Madoran Chronicles series. This is about Alex, who she's like immortal, and one day she goes to boarding school, but then she gets transported to another world where they have powers, they have gifts, all of that. And the magic system in this world was really cool because they each have like a different gift or power. So I thought that was super fun, and I like magic systems like that. And this series, it's definitely very YA. I just fell in love with the characters. Like, they all just are so, they're so good together. It's just such a good group of people, and she just has incredible people in her life, and they go on just so many different missions that are crazy. As the series progresses, it just gets crazier and crazier and more developed, and I feel like sometimes with series like that, it can just feel like the author just like added it on out of nowhere, but this like felt very planned, and like everything was meant to be from the beginning. Like, especially looking back, like you can pick up on certain things. So the series is a great time. All the books are super fast paced. There's a good amount of them, but they're only like 400 pages each, so it's not that bad at all, and you'll just fall in love with the characters and want to read more about them. So yeah, I do have the like Christmas novella, and then there is another book that's like about some of the side characters that I skipped, but I definitely want to go back and read that. But yeah, the way this wrapped up was really good, and I loved the last book. Might be my favorite, and I just love seeing all the characters you've met throughout the series in this one, and just everything led up to this book, and it was so good. And then this is such a recent read, so I'm really happy that it was a favorite. We have Things You Save in the Fire by Catherine Center. I didn't know going in that it's connected to this one, but like in the first chapter, you figure out who the main character is, and you do see them briefly in this book. And I was stoked to figure out that they were from this book, because I remember in the audiobook there was like a little extra chapter at the end about that character, and ever since then I was like hooked. Like I loved that little chapter so much, and I had no clue this book was about them. Immediately I loved it, and it was so good. Like I need a physical copy because it was that good. So it's about our main girl, and she is a firefighter, which is so cool. And basically she has to move kind of across the country to live with her mom, who's having health issues. So she has to leave her fire station and all the friends there. And so she gets to the new station. There's just kind of some drama because she's the only girl, and there's never been a girl at the fire station before. It's just hard for her going into that, obviously. And I loved this story though, because eventually as the story goes on, they click. Like the group of them works so well together at the end, and I love reading about, like, you know, like I said earlier, like the sports, the teams, and then or just like close work friends or friends in general, like found family. It's the best. I'm sorry. The romance in this is so sweet, and again, like I said before, Catherine Center's books kind of just remind me of Abby Jimenez's in the sense that they're just like so deep, and there's always something going on with the characters that they have to work through on their own as well. It is kind of more slow burny. The romance isn't that present, like it's still there, but it's not like super in your face, which I feel like I love as well. I love a more plot than romance. And then Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. I read this in February, so to me it feels like I read this like last year or like forever ago. So this is the last book in BJ and Magnolia's story. This one was a roller coaster. It dealt with so much stuff that has been there since the start of the series, and they just have to work through so much together, and they did a great job doing it. Like throughout their other two books, they've just been very toxic and they've just had a lot of issues, but this book, they got their ish together because it was so good, and I am so happy with how this wrapped up. It was so good. This is a thick book. This is the thickest in the series, I think, but I could have read like double this size. And this series, there's not much plot. Like it's just the characters, but like you grow to care about them so much, even though they're flawed. I love this so much. It was so emotional and sad. There is very sad undertones, so look up trigger warnings if you do get to this book in the series. And I just love seeing the other characters in the book too, because this is like a huge found family series, so I loved seeing them. And also I loved how we got like most of BJ and Magnolia, because their story really needed to work things out, and I'm so glad they did. So yeah, this is one where I've read the other books last year, so. And then I have the entire Crescent City series because I read this all this year, so I'm just grouping them in one. I love this series so much. It's definitely my least favorite of Sarah J Maas's, but it's still a Sarah J Maas series, so like what are you gonna do? I do feel like these books are extremely long, but there is so much that goes on in them, and what I really like about this world is how many different types of species and characters there are. There's fae, there's mermen, there's wolves, there's vampires, there's angels, there's literally everything. And I really like that because I just love reading about different types of like immortal characters. Like they're just all so entertaining to me. I did really like this story. It is like an urban fantasy, so it's set in like not necessarily modern times, but like they have phones and stuff, so it's like current-ish. So yeah, this series definitely isn't my favorite, and it's definitely, I feel like, more kind of mundane. Like there's not a ton going on throughout it all, but it's still Sarah J Maas. It's still incredible. I love her writing, I love her characters, but yeah, this is definitely just not on the level the other ones are for me, but still so good. If you don't know what it's about Bryce, who she's half fae, half human, and so basically she's trying to uncover this mystery that happened throughout the town, so they have to just go on a lot of different missions to do so. They have to interact with a ton of different types of characters and just deal with a ton of different like things in the city and world, and I loved it. It was so good. I'm sorry, like it was still so good. There's just a lot of detail, and to me, I feel like a lot of people say it's really confusing, but I didn't really feel like it was super confusing. I mean, definitely more complicated than her other two series, but that's just because there's so many different types of characters, I feel. And then we have Unwanted by Mia Sheridan. This book I randomly saw at Barnes, and it was getting like traditionally published, and I found it like a week out early before it got traditionally published officially, but it was like already out before, but just got like a new cover and stuff, and I think a new title. And I read the back and I was actually hooked. I went home and started it like immediately, which usually I don't do that with books I buy, which is bad. And then they sit and then the time just goes on and on. But this one I read right away, and I'm so glad I did because I was just such in the mood for it, I guess. So it follows our main girl Harper, and she basically has to help this small town out with a double murder investigation, and their main suspect is this guy Lucas, and he has lived in the woods alone his entire life. So what I loved about this story is there's kind of like a couple different storylines going on. You're getting more about Lucas's past because he literally was in the woods almost his entire life. So that was so crazy to read about. It's definitely kind of emotional and sad. Like I was like, oh, it was hard to read at some points, but it was so good. And then you get the murder investigation, obviously, and there is just so much going on in this book. Like the plot is 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. And on top of that, there's romance. So it's just the perfect book, I feel. The plot in this is actually incredible. Like, I can't believe Mia Sheridan, like, she just has good plot, I feel. Like, I need to read more of her books. I've only read Archer's Voice, but after reading this one, I'm like, that is incredible. Like, how do you come up with this stuff? It's crazy. So yeah, I feel like I said this recently, but like, plot 5 out of 5. Romance isn't necessarily 5 out of 5. Like, it's not my favorite. I didn't like super love it, but it still definitely made the story better, I feel like. I said this before, but like, it could have been just the plot in this book and it would have been 5 out of 5. Like, it was so good. Please go read that because it was so fun and entertaining. I think I read this in 1 or 2 days because I just couldn't stop. And then, okay, this I read recently, so I feel like I'm kind of like, is it actually up here or did I just read it recently and love it? But we have Metal Slinger. This is obviously because of Emmy. I love this book so much, and just the hype that it's been getting, I'm so glad I picked it up. It was so good. I was so caught off guard, and I am just so invested now to see what happens next. Like, someone give me an arc, please. Basically, their world's kind of divided. So our main girl and her kingdom, they live on the water. They've been banished to living on the water on boats, and so every few years they are allowed to go onto the mainlands and go to this like market thing that's going on and like buy other stuff, whatever that they may not have on the water. So they go to this market, and basically ish goes down. Like, it does not go well at all. So they go back to the boats and they're like, that was not good. Stuff went down hard, and so now they're kind of just dealing with the repercussions with that, and that's all I'm gonna say because I went into this very blind, and I feel like that is 100% the way to go in because everything that happened caught me so off guard. Like, that's all I knew before was the boats versus the land and like the beef between them. Also, she kind of grew up with the king's son. Like, they were really close growing up, and they are in a relationship, so there's kind of like that childhood friends to lovers type thing at the start of it, and the story definitely does go in a different direction, like with setting wise, plot wise, character wise, everything. And I loved the way it changed into. The story changed so much, and I am so glad it did because I was like obsessed with how it went and what they had to do. And the ending, actually, just go watch my reactions because it was, I don't know if I'll ever recover, genuinely. Number 2, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This book, I am so glad I finally read this. You just see those books and you're like, I know I'm gonna love this, but like, am I ready yet? I'm so glad I was ready because this is incredible. As you can see, it's number 2. Like, so this follows 2 sisters during World War II, and I loved reading both of their stories equally. Like, there wasn't one POV I was like, oh, like, come on. Like, I loved them both equally, and they're both so different but yet so entertaining. It's just crazy reading about that time period and just what was going on and the sacrifices that had to be made. It was just so entertaining and good, and I just feel like I learned a lot too from this book, and I was hooked from the beginning to the end. Again, I loved it. I loved the characters. The ending, I loved. I just can't say anything more about this book. It made me cry. I don't think I laughed. I was mad. I was crying again. And it was just crazy. I was so proud of the characters at moments. I just feel like it did such a good job of showing the feelings and emotions of what's going on at this time period. And I loved the characters so much. Like, I wanted the best for them so bad. And I just felt so connected to them. And like, I need to give them a hug. Very deserving number 2. It's time. Number 1. I remember I finished this and I knew it was my number 1. So this is about Justin and Emma. They both think they're cursed because they can't find love, basically, and everyone they date later goes on to find their soulmates, like right after they break up with them. So they kind of bond over that. It starts off this like silly comedic relationship, and then it hits you because there's just so much going on in this story besides the romance. Like, there's definitely comedic parts, but it is so deep and wholesome, and these characters just, they're so much going on in their lives, but they still manage to find time for each other and push through that to be together, and I love that so much. Basically, it starts off, they talk through Reddit after bonding over the romance thing, and then Emma finds herself in the same area as Justin, so they decide to give it a chance. And they kind of try and see if they can beat like the curse, and like, hey, if we date each other then break up, then we'll find our soulmates after. That's kind of like the comedic rom-com aspect, but Abby Jimenez delivers with the emotional punch, like punch. And it was just so good because I loved the characters and learning about their lives, their family drama, all this stuff they had to work through, and how they were still able to be there for each other. This book to me was perfect. Justin is a king, and the things he does are actually like so sweet, and I just loved everything about this book. The setting, the characters, the perfect balance of like funny and sad, I feel, and just the pacing, everything. This book is perfect to me. That's why it's my #1. I feel like the fact that it's #1 speaks more about it than I could. You know, I just can't form words right. I just feel like her writing is so good. Like, she just knows what words exactly to put in when. Like, it's just perfection. The easiest #1 ever. Go read this if you haven't, and then read all of her other books because they're all perfect. So if you guys have read any of these, let me know, and please let me know your #1 down below because I would love to read it. Like, actually would love to. So I'll see you guys next week. Peace.